on Birch 365, a non-walkthrough Wednesday. No walkthroughs for months and months and months and months, and somehow we'll get through it with help from guys like Mike Gill, who's good enough to hop on board with us today. In case you didn't see it, he's got a Yale t-shirt on, which he must have got at a garage sale somewhere because he didn't get it at the student store. I can guarantee you that, like me wearing a Harvard shirt. Yeah, just not happening. Mr. Gill, we haven't talked to you since the Super Bowl. How big a letdown was that for you, a guy who said, well, the Eagles are the better team prior to the game being played? Didn't quite work out that way on that Sunday.
No, and I did get it at the student store. I happened to just walk the campus.
I thought it was an honorary degree. I thought that.
I have a T-shirt from every campus I've ever visited. So I
really?
There we go.
Yeah, I've got all the. I must have 25 different shirts that say some college on it. People, did you go there? I visited it once. I actually visited Yale twice. I've been there twice. You got to go to New Haven and get the pizza, man. The pizza.
I've had New Haven. I'm an ESPN guy, so I've had New Haven pizza.
Yeah.
I was extremely disappointed, Jody. I mean, I thought the Eagles were clearly the better team. I think we actually kind of saw that they probably were the better team. In the first half, they kind of dominated that game. And what happened? They did something they hadn't done all year. They turned the ball over. That turnover was just deflating. And I thought it really was the play that changed that game. I don't know if you guys, Sipos was on the radio in Australia yesterday.
Yeah, we saw
punt. That punt, I thought, was another huge, everybody is focused on Gannon and the defense. I could come up with like 6 things that happened before I'm pissed off about the defense in that game. I just thought the Eagles were the better team. And the fact that they are walking around today, the second best team, still a week later, a week and a half later, I'm looking around saying, how did that happen? How did they lose that game?
Let me push back a little bit on the Jalen fumble, because I've gotten into social media back and forth with people because I said on my Twitter that Patrick Mahomes is the man in the NFL, but he was the second best quarterback on the field on Super Bowl Sunday. The Eagles scored 10 points immediately after Jalen Hurts put the ball on the ground, and we're up by 10 points going into
I
the
agree
half.
with that. When that game was at halftime, Mike, and fumble and all, I think people look at the final score and say, they go back, revisionists, and say, fumble, fumble, fumble. If they didn't fumble, they win the game. They handled that very well to the point at halftime. I thought they were winning the game. I said, well, they're the better team. Kansas City's in trouble.
Yeah,
that's what I thought at halftime.
I agree with what you're saying. They answered the bell, but if they go down and score there and they're up 24-7 at half instead of it being a 10,
then the game's over.
The game is really and Kansas City had to be perfect in the second half. That's what the defense is predicated on. We talk about it a lot. The defense is you're not going to go on 10 play, 12 play, 9 play drives multiple times in one game. If you do, it's because you were perfect. Meaning, we didn't get a sack. We didn't get a fumble. We didn't get an interception. You didn't go off sides. There wasn't some sort of penalty to stall your drive. They had no penalties, no sack, no fumble, no interception. They had 3 drives of 9 plays or more. So if you're up 24-7, you would think that's another possession they have to be perfect on.
Doesn't that make the Kansas City Chiefs the better team? If they were perfect, doesn't that make them the better team?
On that day, Jody, yes, I'm not going to push back. On that day, if those two teams play 10 times, I think Philadelphia probably wins 7. But I hate to bring this up, but everybody seems to be finding ways to kind of bring it back. Sipos brought it up. I don't know, TJ Edwards was on the radio the other day. He brought it up. The Eagles are handling this with class, and they are saying all the right things. But now that we're getting further and further away and the players are getting more chances to talk about this, that field was an abomination, a disgrace. And let's put it this way. If Dallas played whoever in the Super Bowl, we should all be complaining about that field, and the league should have to speak about what the hell happened, that field was in such a disgrace of a condition that it's still being brought up. I mean, TJ Edwards called the other night. He said the field was hard. I mean, it was tough for both. He wanted to say how bad that field was, but it was almost like his subconscious took over.
Well, because, and it should, and from this perspective, Mike, look, the field was a disgrace. Everyone's on board with that, but both teams played on it. Both teams played on, and there was an instance, and it was the Kadarius Toney touchdown, where Travis Kelce was mic'd up, and he was communicating with Toney and saying, under control, because he knew it was an ice rink out there, and that was an indication to me of, well, the Chiefs handled it better.
Oh, listen,
the Chiefs handled it better.
This isn't the Eagles lost the game because of the field conditions. It's as fans, we got robbed of what should have been a game that was not talked about the field. I don't care if it's the Eagles playing in this game. If Dallas is in that game, I would be complaining that we as fans deserve better than the field being discussed in a Super Bowl is disgraceful.
Well, that part I agree with.
The NFL passed the buck on that one. It wasn't their fault. It was Rihanna's fault. For all the practice runs she had. That's what took the toll on the field. When in doubt, blame the halftime act.
Yeah.
Nice job, Roger Goodell.
Well, and guess what? Next year, the field is the
field.
same field next year. They better figure it out, because if Philadelphia is not in that game, I'm still ticked off that I had to watch a game that the player, Siposs essentially said that he punted the ball and turned his ankle when he planted.
Yeah. Well, if magically Kansas City, they flipped the switch and they put a better field up and put it down, then I would give more credence to that. Bottom line is they played on the same shitty field they were able to play a perfect second half, essentially.
Absolutely. And we know the Eagles generally, we talked about it last week. In 52, they got the play. Their defense didn't play well, but they got the play. And when I go back to they never got the play. And you're wondering if that play would have been there had the conditions been a little better.
When I go back to the Jalen Hurts play, I'm not saying it's not a big play. Anytime you give up a defensive touchdown, it's a huge play. But to Jody's point, they recovered well. And to your point, your earlier point, Mike, about Jonathan Gannon, everybody's, defaults to him. I gotta go to 6 or 7 things before I bring up Jalen's touchdown. And the bottom line is,
fumble.
Jalen's fumble that turned into a touchdown. Bottom line is what you said about Super Bowl 52, and I've said it on your show. They needed one play.
Yeah.
One play defensively.
Right. It's not that John Gannon
500 yards in Super Bowl 52, but they got the one play.
Right. It's not that John Gannon is not good enough to win that game. He clearly can win that. If you're in that game, you can win that game. On that day. And this is part of the thing. You can't replicate practicing against Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. Like, you get the bullets flying at you at real time, and you have to figure it out. He said it. Look, on that day, Andy Reid's smarter than me. I'm not going to be smart. But how do you learn how to get smarter? You have to face that guy. And the first time you face him, or the second time, this is the second time they faced him, you're like, man, they're doing this, this, and this, and I haven't seen stuff like this before. How do you learn? From experience. The guy is a young coordinator who needs to learn. We're not saying he's perfect, but obviously he has a lot to learn, and we saw it on display in that game. Now, the one play, as they talked about, Peter King's article, the Chiefs lined up wrong. So you wouldn't have seen that formation because it didn't exist.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot out there. But I'll tell you what, this search is interesting because it's showing you, and as Jody, I think you mentioned right before I was coming on, they offered Gannon more money to stay here. That's how much they valued him, because they know that this is a smart guy who was learning on the job, but had a number 2 ranked defense while he was learning on the job here. And now they're scrambling around thinking, are we going to bring a college coach in here? Do we stay in-house? Do we bring a veteran guy? It seems that they are not prepared they weren't prepared for Gannon walking out the door.
Yeah, not as prepared, but I think a lot of that has to do with Nick Sirianni being an offensive head coach. So, as good as Shane Steichen was, and I think Shane Steichen was great, I think they're taking a hit on the offensive side as well. I think people are underestimating that. He is a great play caller, got a great feel for it. maybe Brian Johnson's great, but I don't like that odds. I don't like those odds. So I think they're going to miss Shane Steichen as well. But as far as Jonathan Gannon, and you're right. I think Jody asked me that before you came on, and I about all the names and what they're looking at and what it means. And then before I even get to that, I circle back to the willingness of Jeffrey Lurie to go where he wanted to go to keep Jonathan Gannon. That tells me more than anything else. And that's after the Super Bowl, where he just saw his own team's defense collapse. But again, there's so many narratives. The Andy Reid one is great because, look, we all know Andy's one of the best coaches who's ever lived. I think we could all agree with that. We can all stipulate. And the assumption is, well, he just embarrassed Jonathan Gannon. He just out-schemed him. And then they happen to have Patrick Mahomes mic'd up on the Sky Moore touchdown. And it's the Chiefs that are the Keystone Cops on the play before the Eagles turned into the Keystone Cops. They're not lined up correctly. They're going, what the hell are we doing? But the narrative before that is, oh, he completely out-schemed Jonathan Gannon. It's interesting, and I think all these intricacies, but the bottom line is Jeffrey Lurie said, you know what? This guy's really good. I'm willing to pay him like a head coach to keep him. Why do people not believe that?
That's a good question. There's a lot of conspiracy theories. People thought that Howie Roseman, like, hey, Arizona, will you take this guy? Get him out here. I'm cracking up at that one. Look, fans act like one game is make and break your resume. Yeah. John Gannon's resume suggests that he got these interviews. They're not going to look at your resume and say, well, that one game was really bad. No. When you play a 17
one half, by the way, one half of one.
Right. When you play a 17-game season, you're not playing Patrick Mahomes every single week. These teams are saying, can you get me to the dance? And if we get one game on one day, we have a shot to win that game. But you got to get there. He had the number 2 I asked this question a lot. If you didn't like the Eagles' defense this year, whose defense did you like?
Oh, by the way, for those who don't believe that the Eagles went to whatever lengths they had to try and keep Jonathan Gannon, because neither Jeff Lurie or Howie Roseman has said yet, oh, yeah, we offered him head coach money to stick around. Howie is on record as saying, and John, you'll tell me the first time he said this, oh, we know we're renting Jonathan Gannon.
Oh, my God. Like, I think, 2 months after he was here.
Right.
He's consistently said that. He's consistently known that. And it turned out to be true, obviously. But yeah, they have tremendous.
It was a 2-year rental. It wasn't a bad rental. It wasn't like they had to bring it back to the shop a week later. It's a damn good rental of Jonathan Gannon for the Eagles.
And guys, this is, when Andy started to get his staff poached is when Andy started to have some troubles, because when you start to take your coaches who you feel comfortable with and you feel like, hey, I can give that guy play calling duties, I don't have to stand over him. That's really the sign of how the coach keeps this thing together. And Andy, when they started to take, Harbaugh and Shermer and Leslie Frazier and Sean McDermott and guys started to go, you have to replace all these guys, and you have to build a new rapport. And Jason Avant was on with me at the Super Bowl, and he played for Andy in 2006 when he was in Philly. And he said, Andy wasn't even coaching. He was more worried about the front office duties, and he wasn't coaching barely at all. He was letting his assistants, and that's when Andy was struggling. We were like, what's going on here? And then he went to Kansas City and played for Andy again. And he said, my God, what a different guy, how detailed and creative. He had that zest for coaching again because he's back with the staff of guys that he wanted to be with and that brought him out of it. And, it shows that, like, you could put stuff on guys that you might not know and just be like, hey, you handle the defense. But you have to trust that guy. You have to be trusting of your staff. And now Nick's going to have to find a whole new group of guys that he's going to have to figure out whether he trusts them or not. He had that trust with this group. Now you got to try to find it again. And I think that's probably the biggest thing of this whole offseason is, can Nick Sirianni find guys that he trusts? Now that's why you would say, why not just hire in-house and just, go with those guys? The fact that they might have to go outside the building to bring a guy in here shows you that maybe they're not sure. Now, if Denard Wilson ends up getting that job, maybe that trust is right back and it all kind of goes. But the Eagles went through this before where they had success and lost coaches, and that didn't go so well for a while.
No, Andy and Doug Peterson, obviously, with Frank Reich and John DiPilippo more recently. And then, you have sort of the disconnect that built because I wrote about this week. I got some pushback from the Eagles. They don't like that sentiment, that mentality, that belief that Howie Roseman is running the show and just telling coaches who they're going to hire. And to be fair, they don't do that. Howie doesn't do that. He gathers names and he brings them to the head coach, and the head coach interviews them, and then the head coach makes a decision. But he definitely steers them in a certain direction. And by the way, he's done a good job with it, just like everything else. Howie's the one who found Brian Johnson, not Nick Sirianni. Howie's the one who found Jamal Singleton, not Nick Sirianni. But, it wasn't like you have to hire this guy. He said, this guy's a really, in the case of Brian Johnson, this guy's a really good young coach. Talk to him. Then Nick talked to him. Nick liked him. Nick hired him. That's sort of how it works. Now, the problem with Doug Peterson was, I think Jeffrey gets a little antsy when the expectations aren't reached. So if you go back to Super Bowl 52, you win the title. They decree the new normal. Everybody remembers that. Well, it was more difficult than they assumed. And all of a sudden, still playoffs, but they even win a game with the double doink. Then they lose to New Orleans. Then they lose to Seattle the next year, still making the playoffs. And then all of a sudden, Doug gets loyal to his guys, whether it's Mike Rowe, Press Taylor, Carson Walsh. Now, the ironic thing, Press Taylor's the best example of this. The ironic thing was Press Taylor came into this organization under Chip Kelly. All you heard about Press Taylor from the Eagles, not Doug Peterson, from the Eagles, this kid's a great young coach. He mined the Philly special, by the way. Press Taylor found it on a meaningless Chicago Bears, Minnesota Vikings 2-point conversion. The Bears converted it using the Philly special. So it's really the Chicago special. And to be honest, many college teams, high school teams used it before the Bears. That's how sort of the NFL works. But he was this boy genius. And all of a sudden, because the expectations weren't met, he turned into an idiot overnight. Well, we can't keep Press Taylor. We can't keep Press Taylor. And now good for Press. He's an offensive coordinator in Jacksonville, and they're a playoff team, and Doug is at least being proved correctly in the short term. My larger point here, Mike, and Jody chime in as well. Why do people have to have it's either Nick's got autonomy or Howie's got autonomy? Why? Why do they are so headstrong about that? It's not the case. I'm telling you, it's not the case.
What did Gannon say on his way out the door? That, Andy's smarter than me. I'm not going to deny that, but I'll take something from Andy that 7 brains are better than 1, right? It's a little bit of a voice here and there. It's, a collaboration, and then somebody has to make the ultimate decision. But, ultimately, it's not one guy sitting in a room. Mad science is putting this whole thing together.
I think people think that, though.
It's an organizational collaboration. They all come together. We do it on every level. There's people in the chat. There's people watching that probably coach a little league baseball team. And you sit in a room with the other 2 dads and you say, all right, how are we going to figure out how to tell Joey's parent that he's not going to play all that much? Well, we'll put him on Joe's Pizza and we'll take him so that he gets more. That's a collaboration of how you put a roster together, even at the highest level. It's a lot more meticulous and there's a lot more going on, and the boardroom's a lot nicer, but there's multiple people who sit in a room and put an NFL roster together. That's the way it works.
John, I'll agree with your point on one end and I'll disagree with it on the other. And the best example is the one we brought up earlier about Jamal Singleton. You said how he found him. He was their 9th choice. The coaches got to great lengths to point that out through this entire process. They interviewed and they interviewed and they interviewed. They just kept interviewing. And then they interviewed Singleton. They go, oh, here's our running back coach.
Well, I'll say that.
Took them 8 swings and misses before they got
on that,
him.
though.
So who gets credit for that?
I think Nick was exaggerating. My only point is,
you do. You think he was exaggerating that they didn't interview?
Yeah, they didn't get the 9.
But, well, listen, in any field of
why
work,
would he do that? Why would he?
It's just off the cuff.
Well, even if he doesn't,
I just mean the actual number.
Even if he doesn't, though, in any field of work, if you're the 8th guy, doesn't mean you're the 8th most talented. It means you were the 8th guy. You know, like I could walk into a radio station in another market and be way more talented than someone. They just haven't found me. They don't know me. They haven't heard me. That doesn't mean someone working somewhere is better than I am or better than anybody else. It's just that they might not know who certain talent is. The 8th guy could be more talented than your first choice. You just didn't know the 8th guy existed until later. So we found many situations where we talk about coaching and who's getting opportunities and who's not. It's who you know, who's in your pipeline. We always, soon as a coach leaves, well, who did he coach before? Who did he coach with? You feel comfortable with certain people because you know them. You're much more apt to say, I know that guy. I know he's a good guy. I know what he's doing. That doesn't mean he's the most talented guy. So there are guys who are more talented that are getting passed over, but I just don't know you. I don't know your personality. Are you going to fit in with my group of guys? Are we going to be able to sit at the table and talk about the same things? These are things that you just don't know. So there are more talented people that you might not talk to. You are talking to the pool of people. Now, some people do go outside their bubble and find people that they don't know. Hey, you were recommended by someone. I want to talk to you. So be like, Nick Sirianni's not the first choice. Doug Peterson wasn't the first choice. No. They tried to get other people in there. They finally decided, okay, we'll take Doug. Hey, look, Doug turns out to be better than your first option, your second option, your third option, but you didn't know that at the time.
Yeah, and to Jody's point, what I meant by how we found Jamal Singleton, look, Nick doesn't have time to cull through all that. Howie's got a whole staff. He doesn't have, like Chris Shula. He has a relationship with Chris Shula. So, it's common sense to say, well, Nick already knows the guy. Nick wants to talk to him about the job because he knows him. In the case of Jamal Singleton, there's no previous relationship. He didn't know him. So that's where the staff, and I shouldn't even say Howie and his staff put together a list, and they have these names and say, this guy's good, maybe take a look at him. And then Nick takes a look at Jamal Singleton and interviews him. And that's where he hit the home run. And Nick said, yeah, this is my guy. Slam the podium. That's what I'm saying. But, that's Howie in the personnel department job to come up with names when you don't have a guy. Like if Tommy Reese, Nick loves Tommy Reese, loves him. And every year he says, do you want to come to the NFL? Do you want to come to the NFL? They coach together with the Chargers. To this point, Tommy is not. Now he's in Alabama. And he'll probably be in the NFL at some point. He's got guys like that. Shane Steichen was one of them. Kevin Patullo. He's extremely close to Kevin Patullo. But there are other guys, the holdovers, Jeff Stoutland. Howie's like, well, you don't know Jeff Stoutland, but trust me on this one. You want to keep Jeff Stoutland. Worked out pretty well. So that part of it it's sort of a mix and match. Nobody's saying you got to hire this guy. Nobody. The only time that happens, and it happens more on the other end, when it's you got to fire this guy, and that's when Jeffrey Lurie needs a scapegoat. And expectations haven't met. There will be times when we'll say, nope, we can't go that direction. And that's what happened with Doug Peterson.
Agreed and understood. But I will just say this, since we brought him up earlier. I remember having Jeff Lurie on our show on WIP way back when he just became the owner of the Eagles and he was making his second coaching hire. And he said, Andy Reid blew us away. When he came in, had never been even a coordinator, was a positional coach, and he came in and had these slew of binders with information on the guys he wanted to hire for his first coaching staff. Had never even been a coordinator, and Andy already knew exactly who he wanted for his entire coaching staff before he ever got the job. Well, the Nick Sirianni should be able to do the same thing. If your Nick doesn't have time to be able to go out and think about coaches from other teams. Oh, Andy Reid did, and he came prepared, and that's why he became the head coach of Philadelphia Eagles.
There's a big, number one, there's a big difference in the time, because at the time, Jeffrey was a very young owner, at least, from a standpoint of experience. Andy, again, look at his first staff. Andy had been doing that for years and years and years. So that's your first staff. And Andy had been on that, even though nobody else was on the Andy radar. Andy had put together, everybody has coaching notebooks, assistant coaches who have ambition, and that's most of them. They have coaching notebooks. I just mentioned there's certain guys Nick has, Tommy Reese, guys he did bring here, the Steichens of the world, the Patulos of the world. He had core guys he wanted to take. Sometimes you can't take guys, as Andy Reid was the first one to say, go build your own staff. Don't take my guys. So there's a lot of guys you have relationships with you can't get for whatever reason, timing. Nick wanted to keep Jim Bob Cooter last year. Couldn't do it. Didn't have a position. Kevin was still here. Kevin Patulo was still here. Shane Steichen. So there's a lot that goes into it. My point is he couldn't get the whole staff together. So when you don't have a guy, when you don't have a ready-made guy, and that could be not because you don't have one, Jody, because you can't get somebody because he's under contract. If it's a lateral move, it's not a coordinator move. Maybe you can't get him. And then you got to go, well, we got to look for somebody else. And that's where the Brian Johnsons, the Jamal Singletons come in the world. And that's the personnel department. They already have a list. They have a list.
When you talked about Andy, Jody, that was Jeff Lurie's second year as an owner. Well, here we are 23 years later. He's made many more connections and now has a much better understanding of who are some, and like the Eagles, other teams know we can go to the Eagles because they generally give us people that are well-trained, very good at their job. So like Gannon, we said, he's only been a coordinator for 2 years. He hasn't seen all the bullets flying at him. 10 years from now as a coordinator, okay, maybe he sees, Patrick Mahomes, I've seen him 3, 4, 5, 6 times now. I'm much more prepared for what Andy and Patrick are going to throw at me. Same thing with Jeffrey Lurie in these coaching searches. And by the way, Jeffrey Lurie and this regime have done a really good job of uncovering coaches that no one's ever heard of.
Yeah.
By the way, Andy Reid, not the second year of Jeff Lurie's ownership.
No, second.
Not even
coach.
the second coach of Jeff Lurie's ownership. Yeah. He inherited Kotite, he hired Ray Rhodes, and then he finally got Andy Reid. So he's a little bit more experienced.
Second hire.
Right. Second hire. Right. He was here with Kotite?
He was here. He inherited him.
He inherited Kotite, yeah.
But
and then,
so whatever it was,
Ray
94,
Rhodes,
95.
Andy Reid thereafter.
But he was still a young owner.
Yeah.
He didn't have a ton of experience.
All right, Mike, last thing. I asked John this yesterday. We know the upsides and the downsides. Push comes to shove when we get closer to free agency. They got to make a call on this within the next franchise tag is 2 weeks, right, John? The window opened up 2 days ago.
Window opened up yesterday or 2 days ago, whatever it was.
It stays open for 2 weeks to make the decision as to whether you're going to slap a franchise tag on a guy. You think they're going to go there with C.J. Gardner-Johnson? The safety position is one of the less expensive ones because they're all broken down by position. The running back franchise, the quarterback franchise tag, the defensive end franchise tag. Safety is still, relatively speaking, as compared to all the other positions, not a bad price at $14 million and change. But then you're locked into that number. There's no spreading it out. There's no phony years on the back end that you can relieve your cap hit for the upcoming season. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson worth $14 million against the cap next year?
He's an interesting one because he is versatile. I mean, they use him at slot corner, but he generally was a safety. He led the league in interceptions, but now you're getting a new coordinator. What does the new coordinator want to do with that position? Knowing the organizational philosophy, you would think that Hargrave may be a candidate just because they value the interior line so much. Do they want to lose Hargrave and Fletcher Cox? Are they ready to go to Jordan Davis full-time and Milton Williams and maybe draft someone? So I wouldn't be shocked if Hargrave was just because of the way they build on the lines. I know we heard CJ Gardner-Johnson's name, and I like him a lot, and but I would think that the organizational philosophy is always the line, regardless of who the coordinator is. The coordinator would have to come in, baby, and say, look, the safety position for me, that guy is so valuable. I need that guy here. But then you would think that would have to be a hire within the next week or so, right? Is there a timeline on when they want that coordinator here? So they're in a weird spot.
You probably want them in place for the combine. So
right.
But we'll see if they get that done. March 7th is the deadline for the franchise tag. If the Eagles do use it, it would be strictly a strategic use of it.
Yeah.
They do not want anybody playing under the franchise tag. They never do. It doesn't make sense from a salary cap standpoint. And even more so this year because they're probably going to get the Jalen Hurts extension done. You don't want big hits on your cap for 1 year. You want to use those voidable years, which have been the Howie Roseman, Jake Rosenberg trick, and everybody copies the Eagles. And that's why they do what they do.
They would be the two guys. Oh, I guess Bradbury. Now, the interesting thing will be, I had a guy the other night insistent with me that who the hell would ever want to play for John Gannon after what happened in the Super Bowl? This is what fans think about. I said, because Gannon now, you would imagine, much like when Buddy went to Arizona, what did he do? He took guys with him. Bradbury, Hargrave. TJ Edwards. You would imagine that Gannon's going to target some of the guys. And by the way, I told the guy, oh, yeah, I would hate to play for a coordinator who allowed me to have my career best year. Yeah. He had 4 guys have career high sacks. One guy.
By the way, I went through Vic Fangio's career, 19 years as a coordinator. How many years did he have as a head coach? 2 or 3?
3.
3 years as a head coach. Never had the number 2 defense in the NFL. Never got that high. Number 3 was as high as he got.
Right. Brandon Graham has been in the league for his whole career in Philadelphia. He had his best season ever.
That I don't agree with. He had his most sacks.
All right. Well, the fans love sacks. Yeah. He had the most sacks he ever had this year. Jody won sacks. Hassan Reddick has been in 3 different defenses. Arizona, 11 sacks.
Josh Sweat had a career year.
He plays for John Gannon, and he has 19 sacks. Yeah. You don't think these guys enjoyed playing in this defense for John Gannon? You guys are out of your minds.
Yeah. Josh Sweat, Hassan Reddick, Javon Hargrave, James Bradbury, TJ Edwards, Marcus Epps, Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, every single one of those players had their best season under the worst defensive coordinator in the history of mankind, at least according to some Eagles fans.
Who the Eagles were ready to pay head coach money to stick around and be the defensive coordinator for. M. Gill, good job as always, buddy. We will be punching you up again next Wednesday. Thanks for jumping on when you do. We'll keep it going.
At Mike Gill Show, by the way. Follow Mike on Twitter, the Sports Bash. I'll be on today, I think. Drive Time, ESPN South Jersey.
What college shirt will you be wearing next week, Mr. Gill?
I've got Princeton, Vanderbilt, Syracuse. I've visited a lot of different universities. I did play-by-play for a while, so I've been all over the place.
Yeah. See, how many West Virginia shirts do you have?
Oh, I probably have 30.
30.
Without the green screen, you can go orange for us next week. We couldn't wear orange in front of our green screen. No. You can go whatever color. We got some orange behind you, buddy. That might actually not mesh. So, all right, maybe not Syracuse. Gill, always a pleasure. Thanks, bud.
All right, boys. See ya.
Thanks, Mike Gill from the Sports Bash down the shore, 97.3 ESPN Radio. All right, McDonald and McMullen, we got an hour in the books. That means we got an hour left to play. coming up in less than 20 minutes now. Our buddy Paul Domwich from the 3013.com and
Tush push
right here.
talk.
Oh, yeah.
Tush push talk.
He was the guy who got Dean Blandino to go on record and say, yeah, this is a fait accompli. They're taking it out of the NFL. It's not pleasing to the optic nerve, and the NFL will be looking to remove that. Just one of several things we'll be talking about with Paul Domwich coming up here on Bird.